Told you guys, Jewish events, 7:05. It's 7:06, so we're even late for our late start. So thank you all for your patience. And we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. This is, as we're in this kind of COVID universe, we've been trying to think, what are ways to engage with the community? How can we bring programming to populations? How can we continue to do what we do in this kind of new normal? And when I started talking to Anne, I was like, well, do you think you want to do a conversation starter? And she was like, but my book's coming out. I'm like, yes, book talk. And so I was really excited that she was willing to do this, because I have found her approach so refreshing and kind of opening up the world of engaging people with Alzheimer's and dementia. I'm guessing if I were to survey this population and ask, have you experienced, has someone in your life had Alzheimer's or dementia? Have you dealt with someone with Alzheimer's and dementia? Are you feeling, are these questions that you have for yourself, that every single one of us would raise our hand and say, yes, these are questions that we have and that we have about ourselves or about our parents or about our grandparents. And this is one of the reasons why I think this talk is so important, because it is something that could impact any one of us. And I think one of the things that I've loved the most about being involved in the Spark program is that it's really changed the way I look at Alzheimer's and dementia, that memory loss isn't an end, that memory loss is just a part of a journey. And I think Anne has really been a part of me seeing it in that way. So I'm gonna read her very fancy bio. I think she's going to kill me, but that's okay, because it is fancy and fabulous and deserved. So she is a professor of theater at the Peck School of the Arts at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the founder and president of TimeSlips. Basting's innovative work as an artist and scholar has been recognized by the MacArthur Genius Fellowship, an Ashoka Fellowship, a Rockefeller Fellowship, and multiple major grants. She is an author-editor of multiple books, including the Penelope Project, Forget Memory, and the book we're here to talk about tonight, Creative Care. TimeSlips, her program that she innovated, fosters an alliance of artists and caregivers, bringing meaning and joy to late life through creativity, and has certified facilitators in 47 states. So, Mary, there's room for you to join, and 18 countries. And we are so excited to hear from her tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Anne.
Well, thank you very much for that fancy bio. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. It's been, the book came out on the 19th, and it's been quite a journey already of sharing the work. I was apprehensive about how this might work, bringing a book out at a time when bookstores are all closed, and how do you get books to people, and conference keynotes are not happening except online. But it's been sort of like we were mentioning before with the online Shiva and memorials, that there's a kind of a lovely new intimacy to this Zoom reading series that I've been doing, and I hope you enjoy it. I also apologize, I've had a cough that's a little irritating to, I'm sure, you and me at the same time, so if I suddenly go into mute, you know what's happening. It's that or my children or my dog. I'm looking forward to Ellie joining in dialogue. I thought I would start by just doing a little reading, and I picked two passages. This book is, people often ask, the first question they ask is, why did you write this? And it's a great question. I've been writing about the work I've been doing and working with these amazing people with the Spark Alliance for a long time. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and my dissertation from way back in 1996 was on the performance of aging in contemporary American culture. So I've been doing this work for a long time, but primarily as either an artist, so creating plays or doing artistic work, or writing academic work. The book Forget Memory from 2009 with Johns Hopkins was an academic press. And I just relished the opportunity that I think sort of on the heels of the MacArthur enabled me to get a mainstream publisher, to be able to get this message out and tell the story of the last 25 years in a way that was really more story-based and felt. And that, that's what I tried to do. So I hope that's what you feel when you hear it and when you read it. The book's broken into, the opening section answers the question that the other question everybody asked me, which is, how did you get into this? Especially as someone in my 20s writing about this. Believe me, I got a few, furrowed brows and raised eyebrows of, why are you drawn to this work? So that's the story of that in that first section. And then the second section is really all about the elements of the work. There's a whole chapter called, what is creative care? Bringing those two elements together and what happens. I'll read a little bit about that today. Then, and each one of those sections breaks it down into an element of creative care. Yes, and improvisation, learning to ask beautiful questions, which those in the Spark Alliance have known of open-ended questions, but we've shifted to call them beautiful questions to inspire a little poetry in our souls a little. Giving proof of listening, opening yourself to wonder. And when all of those elements are in place, there's a chapter on awe, which is something I'll address a little bit later. But the experience of awe, I think, is one that I hope we all can aspire to in our lives, whether or not we have disabilities or not. The third section is all about what happens when you apply this approach to our care systems. We can transform the way we even understand and provide care at a much larger level. And that section tells the story of all the projects that I've been doing, one seemingly bigger than the next, year after year, culminating with a project I did. It's still underway. We're in the third year of it. It's wrapping up with 12 rural nursing homes across the state of Kentucky, where we collaborated with artists, the staff, the elders, community members. We taught the staff the TimeSlips core approach, and then taught them to read the creative assets in their in people that they have at their disposal, and also their physical, their resources in their communities. Together over 2 years, we reimagined the story of Peter Pan, and then through about hundreds of creative workshops. And then we put it all back together again into an original play that we staged inside of 3 of those nursing homes, turning the invitation outward to the community to come in and experience it. The last performance was exactly a year ago, and it feels a little bit like a hallucination compared to this moment when no one can go into a nursing home. We had over 400 people come through to see the final performance in Hodgenville, Kentucky. The final scene was Wendy being freed from hospice. You'll hear about that in the opening section I'm going to read. And the entire care community singing "I'll Fly Away," accompanied by local bluegrass musicians, and doing it with a choreography that was created by the elders themselves. It's just stunningly beautiful. And I'm thankful we at least got a little video so that we can realize that it wasn't just a hallucination, but it actually happened. At the end of it, I said to the staff and the elders there that congratulations, you've just transformed a place that was a stigmatized health center into a place where beauty and meaning can happen every day. And it is now a cultural center. Congratulations. So that's sort of my long-term dream, is that this separation of the way that we over-medicalize aging as a process and disability, that we can remember to infuse and collapse the boundary between arts and cultural organizations and health and social service agencies, that meaning and beauty happen, and it's a part of of what we need to be healthy and live fulfilled lives. So Elliot, I'll just read a little passage. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. This is actually the opening of the book. So here we go. Everybody okay? Yeah? Okay, good. Chapter 1, in which Ruth teaches me what joy looks like. It was opening day. Spirits were incredibly high. I had walked into Morgantown Care and Rehabilitation in Morgantown, Kentucky that Saturday morning to a chorus of exuberant greetings, not what you'd usually expect at a nursing home. Now it was just about 2 p.m., showtime. After 2 weeks of rehearsal and a year of planning, the elders, local actors, volunteers, and staff were about to perform their version of Peter Pan, one in which Wendy is in hospice care in her final phase of growing up. And the audience, rather than clapping to prove their belief in fairies, would meet the extended hand of an elder to prove that they believed in one another. There would be song and dance. There would be a giant crocodile and pirates, and of course, flying. These residents, several of whom had not been out of their rooms for months, were about to welcome an audience to see them and their nursing home in a completely new light. They were inviting the audience to see beauty and meaning in a place where most people see only overwhelming loss. Ruth had been at every rehearsal. If I had to guess, I would say Ruth was in her late 80s with a bob of gray hair framing her face. Riding a wheelchair, she was one of the dozen elders dancing in the finale to Frank Sinatra singing "Fly Me to the Moon." As Shirley, a resident who had been the activity director in this very nursing home for 40 years, offered a blessing on the performance, and the stage manager called out, "Places." Ruth's care partner wheeled her out onto the home's front patio for the pre-show. The wind carried a chill, but every elder in the dance chorus insisted on going outside to greet the audience and listen to the live music. I looked around at the faces. Every one of them was wide-eyed and wonder-filled, except Ruth. She was crying. Her eyes were bright, but tears rolled down her cheeks. Her mouth was twisted into a half smile, half grimace. I went to her straight away, kneeling down in front of her and taking her hands. "Ruth," I whispered, "are you okay?" She nodded eagerly. "Are they happy tears?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said with a laugh. "Happy, happy tears." Happy tears. There's no better phrase to capture a feeling of joy in a time of tremendous challenge, such as when we create and experience poignant beauty in, say, a time of dementia, or a time of profound physical changes, or a time of powerfully missing people who have gone on before you, or who are too far away or too busy to visit. In my 25 years of bringing the arts to people in late life, almost no one believes me when I first suggest it is possible to feel joy in these moments, or that joy and meaning can coexist in some of the hardest times of our lives, if we are lucky enough to live that long. The power of being invited into creating meaning, of working together to create art that has a lasting legacy, is an elusive thing to describe. But when people feel it, They understand it deeply. I'm fairly confident that in the beginning of their training, the staff at the nursing home in Morgantown did not believe in that power, nor did the elders or their families. But after the show, they sure believed in themselves, in one another, and in the power of the shared creative experience. I didn't always believe either. I didn't even know it was a thing that could be believed in. My journey toward the performance of Wendy's Neverland in a nursing home in Morgantown was a long, slow discovery for me, a gradual accumulation of experiences rather than a lightning strike. I continue to learn every day, especially now, as the landscape of time shifts under my own feet, bringing changes to my own family. It is my hope that the stories I've gathered here, stories of how I learned to apply the insights from theater and creativity studies to the world of elder care and memory loss, stories of bringing joy and connection to those who thought these possibilities were gone, stories from my many encounters with elders and care partners, offer readers a similar journey toward discovery, a journey toward believing that beauty, growth, learning, and joy are all possible in moments that most people assume to be overwhelmed only by loss and sorrow. My hope is that by reading this book, you can follow in my footsteps and transform your relationships with people experiencing dementia and other challenges that can accompany aging. So there you have a wee bit of that. And then I'll just do one more. And this is one I picked especially for this crowd. This is a story from a chapter from one of the elements of creative care called Proof of Listening, which actually quotes Atul Gawande, who did research on solitary confinement. And when he described solitary confinement, the symptoms that come out of it, because human beings can't take it, right? We go crazy. They sounded almost exactly like symptoms of dementia. And it really moved me to consider how we are actually keeping people in solitary confinement, either as the disease process, and also in the conditions of care. So Proof of Listening. Proof of Listening gave Rose a sense of purpose. In an adult day program 1,000 miles away, Proof of Listening drew Dorothy out of an anxious, repetitive loop. In the basement of the synagogue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a small group gathered in a circle of chairs at the bottom of the atrium. Dorothy wore a worried face. The taut lines across her forehead and vague fear behind her eyes seemed to say, "How can this be? How did I get here?" But the only sounds that came from her mouth were ba, 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 ba. She only offered these sounds if someone asked her a question. "How are you today, Dorothy?" Might receive ba, 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 ba in return. Was there a pattern? Was it the same number of syllables each time? Was there a code that we could crack? There didn't seem to be. But the storytelling sessions were different. We welcomed the storytellers to the moment and assured them that they didn't need to remember anything. Elizabeth, who hosted the day center, and I offered a constant reminder that the storytellers could say anything they wanted and we would weave it into the story. We were just making up a story together after all. Dorothy had the same answer to every question, but Elizabeth and I echoed every response, the number of ba's and the worry, the wonder, or the humor behind them. Did the inflection go up or down? I would look Dorothy in the eyes and repeat back what she had offered. Ba, 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 ba? I asked her. Yes, she nodded, and a light sparked somewhere deep behind her eyes. This became routine for a few weeks, but then something shifted. I asked the group what they wanted to name a character in the story. Ba, 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 Dorothy, ba, 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 ba. The entire group took a collective breath. I repeated what she said back to her, trying to echo her as best I could, but unable to separate a layer of giddiness from my own voice. Ba 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 ba, Dorothy, ba 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 ba. She beamed. Yes, indeed. That would be the name of the character. Slowly and deliberately she added, ba ba ba, I love you, ba 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 ba. I held her hands and echoed it back to her, slowly and deliberately. It wasn't a cure. It didn't fix any biomarkers or whatever was wreaking havoc in her brain. But Dorothy was heard. She gave me the simplest, biggest gift in return. I cried the whole long subway ride home to Brooklyn. And I'm crying now, like 20 years later.
I'm crying with you. So that, I think, I mean, this work is so important and impactful in so many ways. And I think there are so many ways of developing it. But how do you even start with that nucleus of what creative engagement looks like? You know, what is how, and how can you tell the difference between what is and what isn't?
You know, I think a really clear example is a story that I tell in the book, and I've told it many, many times over the years, which is when I first started this, I was just volunteering in a locked unit of an Alzheimer's unit in a pretty bleak nursing home. And it happened to be here in Milwaukee. I was here on a fellowship. And I was dutifully doing what everyone was doing. Reminiscence work, reality orientation, come back, let me remind you where we are, who you are, you know, trying to trigger reminiscence and memory. And did not work. There were a lot of reasons why it didn't work. People were over medicated. It was a chaotic environment. People couldn't concentrate. It was really, really hard. And I ended up one day just tearing a picture out of a magazine and thought I would just try something different, which is coming out there and saying, you know what? We don't remember so good. Let's not worry about that. If I ask one question that is fact-based or memory-based, there's probably just one pathway in the brain for that answer to travel. And most likely that pathway is broken. Instead, I'm going to ask you just to make it up. And by just opening it up, what do you want to name this person? And by opening up the possibilities, you open up 1,000 possible responses. It doesn't even have to be a word. It can be a movement or a sound or a line. If you know, Trisha and you all that do artwork, Kathy and Nancy, you know that it can also be shape or color or texture. Any mode of expression in the arts, which is an emotional or symbolic language, opens up, once you shift away from memory toward imagination, you open up a world of communication. And that is really the difference. The whole chapter on creative care talks about how we see creativity and we understand it to be generative, that we're making something new through the creative process that has value. And caregiving, on the other hand, we tend to see as depleting and in situations of loss. But when you bring those two things together, when you open yourself to using the arts and creativity as part of care, you turn the care relationship into a generative potential relationship. That is, in a nutshell, sort of the difference. When I tore that picture out of the magazine and I brought it in, you know, some of you have heard the story. It was a picture of the Marlboro Man of all things. And I just said, what do you want to call him? And someone said Fred. And I was like, well, first of all, it's a miracle because nobody's spoken for 6 weeks, right? I'm like, yes, I'm going to go with it. So I just write it down and then I repeat it. And then Fred Astaire. And it was 45 minutes of singing and laughing and joy and me repeating it so that the moment of creativity was always in their grasp, so that they were always on the edge of answering it. Because the other thing about dementia is that the world is moving so fast, it's faster than your cognition. And so you are hesitant to add because you might be adding something that's 15 minutes ago. But if you repeat and invite the person into that always at the precipice of the creative moment, they can always add to it and always be there for expression, which is really, really powerful because the tools of expression have been removed from them. The tools of connection, meaning making, creating something beautiful has really all been taken away.
With that, the big challenge I know for so many people is how do you stop that moment? And especially for those of us who do things in Spark, where you're with care partners, of there is this feeling that I'm going to fill the answer for my loved one. And there's such a feeling of, I'm so used to answering these questions. What do you want? Oh, you want toast. They always want toast, so you never give them the opportunity to say, actually, I really want a waffle. I've been dying for waffles. So how do you kind of get care partners to have, or not just anyone in medical professionals, everyone have this moment to say, wait, let's stop and give them time?
I think too that there's a really noble impulse to rebuild the memory of the person. You're protecting the person. You're fighting off the symptoms of the disease or the evidence of the disease, and people get very invested in that, especially family caregivers, who are carrying the recognition of what's been lost with them at every moment. And so it is totally understandable when people do that, but it means that the framework you have to create around that sort of, it's a weird word for me to say, but like a sacred creative laboratory, right? Becomes really clear that it's a free space of play, and that the rules, the caregiver can let that go, right? The caregiver can play too, because the caregiver does not get to play, right? And that hurts them just as much as the person. So to be in a space where your role as facilitator becomes, it's okay. The rules are that we could say anything in this space, and it'll become a space of meaning making and experimentation. Just trust it, right? And that's a lot of what we encourage people to do, is to say, just give it a try, or to encourage and remind the caregiver that, you know what, actually, he might not want the pancake. He might want something else. Should we ask him? Let's try it. And actually, in the book, there's a couple of specific examples, right, of exactly the point that you're talking about. A story that Karen Stobie, a longtime collaborator in this work, told about a TimeSlips session that she was doing, and also another scene back in the synagogue on the Upper East Side, in the basement of the synagogue, with a wife who was doing the same thing. One of the core tenets is that it's improvisation, and you say yes, and so yes means I accept this moment and this condition, and I'm going to add to it in a positive way. I'm not going to undercut it. And it's really clear that once you say yes, but, or no, all of the magic of that sacred, creative, playful circle just disappears. And the person assumes they're going to be wrong, and that their expression won't matter. So the beauty that can come out of those encounters of bringing creativity and care together dissolves with a yes, but, or a no.
So yes, and I How, like, in this universe, and you've dealt with people, and I think actually even just letting the group here know how many different types of institutions and populations you've worked with at this point, how have you seen these kind of cultural distinctions, cultural markers, religious differences, socioeconomic differences? How do they come out in the way that people respond, or in the programming that's most appropriate for them?
That's a really interesting question. I see this work, and sort of my mission with this work, with TimeSlips, the nonprofit that I work with, as pouring the essence of this approach into sort of the water of care, so that it flows to everywhere that there's people who are in care situations. So that's whether it's at High Point, or in the skilled care of a nursing home, or an adult day program, and the memory cafes that are happily flourishing around the country, so that are supporting people living at home, that are so much part of the Spark Alliance. Whether it's in libraries or cultural institutions where there's gatherings of family members and people with dementia, or even just senior centers where people are just isolated. We've even mapped, and there's a chapter about our work with Meals on Wheels, trying to bring creative engagement out with the meal delivery. And that same project, we also used the telephone reassurance system, which I'm really thankful we did, because it's turning out to be really helpful in this moment of knowing how to bring creative engagement through the phone. It's really, we've worked with very under-resourced communities to very resourced communities. You know, the highest, the fanciest of the fancy long-term care communities to deeply impoverished Meals on Wheels delivery systems, where the driver, when I did a ride along, said, "Don't come to the door. I don't want you to see this person this way." So where the only mechanism we had was the meal delivery, there was not even a phone, which is a good reminder at this point, when everyone's like, "Great, Zoom, we'll just do everything virtually." And I'm like, no, can't do that. Everything, you know, the good old US Postal Service and the telephone are probably the most universal points of access for people to have creative engagement come into the meaningful engagement coming into their lives. Culturally, we're in 20 countries across the world now. I've been actually surprised about how universal the approach is. There was a research study that came out of China about the reduction in depression. I was like, geez, really? It's really kind of surprising. The Philippines, Japan, and in Japan, it's an art museum that's using it in kind of memory cafe-like settings. It's just fascinating. In Italy, they worked with museums to collaborate with nursing homes. Their whole museum system in Florence is activated and part of the program. Israel is using it. It's really fascinating how probably the most common adjustment is in the relationship between the staff, who the staff is and who's inviting, and who's being cared for, and what the power dynamic is there. And so we just, oftentimes they come from different cultural backgrounds or economic backgrounds. And so we have to be mindful of expressions of power and powerlessness in those dynamics. But otherwise, that's pretty consistent. In some cultures, there's a much more reserved tendency and a greater caution around play. I think it's a tragedy pretty universally that play has really been associated only with children, when there's been great studies about how learning happens through play. And the assumption, I think, that's carried through to adulthood is that learning stops. And it just doesn't. And we continue to learn through play. And I think particularly with experimentation in language, when you're having challenges with language or bridging in situations of extreme isolation, play also is very helpful to sort of break the hold of loneliness.
You were pointing to this next question, but you mentioned the Q word, and so how like we keep hearing nursing homes are closed down, people aren't leaving their rooms, seniors are more and more isolated. We need to be worried about these people, and yet there are these other challenges that already existed. How has your work shifted in this moment to engage these new challenges? What are the kind of breakthroughs, if there are hopefully there are breakthroughs that you've been able to find in this time?
I tell you, when the world went on lockdown, when we caught up with the world on lockdown, the TimeSlips team sort of had a big huddle and just a furious expenditure of energy and ideas about how to make what all of our resources. TimeSlips has a creativity center that has 400, and it's online and it's all free, 400 prompts for people to use. And we've been online and virtual since 2011, but not everyone knew about it. And also, I think we wanted to make the downloadable worksheets much more accessible. So there was just this flurry of activity of how to make things more accessible. One thing we did was gather a list of nursing homes, put out a call to see which nursing homes wanted to accept mail, because not all of them were accepting mail for infection control. I think that's eased up a little bit now with more research on how it's carried on surfaces. But so you'll see on the TimeSlips site that we have a map of 150 nursing homes and care homes and systems across the world that have asked for postcards. And then we offered some models for how to write and what to write. And it's been so joyful to see what's coming out and to have people document that. So that was one, the list of nursing homes. The downloadable worksheets. We took the I Won't Grow Up project, the Wendy's Neverland, the Peter Pan project. We took some of those workshops that we had done in person and turned them into little short videos and worksheets. And you'll see that on our resource page as well, on the webinar page. We've shared some of our creativity guides, which we use to guide projects. So all these creative workshop ideas, because the other thing we've realized, I think more recently, is that time has become suspended. For people with dementia, it's always a little bit suspended, but even just, all of us, what's a weekend? What's a holiday? What is summer, right? It's just completely, time is we've lost the scaffolding. And so these long range projects that we do, where we put in workshops over time that then culminate in a final celebration event of some sort, that can help people reset that scaffolding of time. And that's what we're really hoping to provide people. One-offs just sort of keep you in that limbo land, but a program that develops over time, that you keep developing and evolving and learning and growing with, that really helps you to have something to look forward to. So we also adapted by rather than expecting people to come back to the Creativity Center, we have a weekly email that you can sign up for that has a list of prompts for people, some examples. We've been working, we were working before COVID with the city of Durham, North Carolina, on a project to reach people with dementia living alone in the community to make sure they're creatively engaged. And we were just about to go out there for the training, and instead we shifted gears, and we've been offering 20, 25-minute creative engagement sessions by webinar and accessible by phone, all inspired by a beautiful question. And that's another one of the types of engagement in our Creativity Center, is our series of beautiful questions. So that the idea, we were always going to do that with Durham. It just wasn't going to start quite so quickly in these workshops. They were going to start kind of memory cafes where these were going to proliferate. The responses to the beautiful questions are going to be assembled into, I'm going to pull them into kind of an original poem. And then we're going to collaborate with a composer who's going to arrange that poem for the Durham Children's Choir, who will either perform it on people's lawns or in a big auditorium in where people can gather and be part of it interactively. That's our dream for, we decided to postpone it to 2022 in order to have a chance of group assembly again, just because I think that'll be the most powerful possible thing. And then finally we have, oh, I didn't bring one in here with me, I could have shown you. We printed postcards of 4 beautiful questions. What is something you'd like to leave to the next, what is a gift you'd give the next generation? What makes you laugh? If you could fly anywhere, where would you fly right now? And what is the most beautiful sound in the world? And we printed 200,000 of those. And we shared them with whatever aging service provider wanted it across the country. And I have about 10 boxes of them sitting in my front foyer. The leftovers. So I'm going to share those with Meals on Wheels in Milwaukee and hopefully with some of the aging services providers around the state. The answers come to our 800 number, and Wisconsin Public Radio is set to edit those into sound collages and share them in Wisconsin Life Stories, which is really, I'm excited for.
I think anytime I hear about your projects, that I'm just always I'm amazed by the level of partnership. That it's never, hey, we're going to do this. It's always, we're going to do this, and then we're partnering with this group, and you're bringing, everything has this intergenerational piece. It has this both inward facing and outward facing piece, and it's just so well thought out in terms of a structure of being a kind of a broad community engagement. How hard is it to develop that cohort, and where and how much of this is coming from the organization itself that you're working with, and how much is coming from Anne and from your TimeSlips team? Like, what's the secret sauce?
It's all creative asset mapping and dialogue. So we sat down with the Durham Dementia Inclusive Durham team and said, what are your priorities? And they wanted, you know, Durham has some of the aches and pains that Milwaukee does in segregation, and some of the inequities between the African American community and then, like, say, Duke and the Research Triangle. So they wanted, to them, it was really important that whatever artistic partner that they brought on was respected in both communities. And I said, what cultural organizations in your community do that? They said, the Durham Children's Choir. Said, wow, that's perfect. Let's do that. And then let's teach the kids how to ask the beautiful questions, you know? So then they understood, like, how to map, and in our training, our organizational training, the creative asset mapping is one of the elements of it. So we teach them how to read their own community assets and to figure out what their own goal setting is. I'm also a big believer that that part of the reason we have bad care is because we allow it to happen behind closed doors, and that we just need to open every possible door and not be ashamed of it. It's natural. It's been, you know, how many years has there been human life? This is not ever something to be ashamed of. This is just something that's natural and part of our lives. And we can create meaning and joy all the way to the end. So these relationships don't have to be out of pity or fear. They can be out of mutual exploration and growth and joy. That's just always the framework I take, unapologetically. With the I Won't Grow Up project, that last performance in Hodgenville, Kentucky, they're like, well, our high school has a really great brass band. It was like, oh my God, that is awesome. Will you invite them? They ended up playing, there were these 3 incredibly stoic young, high school juniors and seniors, boys, right? And they started out like very stiff and unsure. And the last performances, they were doing a kick line, they were hugging all the elders, they were just exuberant and hilariously themselves. And I thought, they're never going to forget this, and they're never going to experience aging in this. They're going to be assets in their own family, and they're going to change the trajectory of their own aging process because of this experience.
I love that. And I love hearing about all these projects. Like, they just make me feel so inspired and excited. And I think that it kind of is, that you pointed to this, that really there is no cultural organization that can't do something in this universe. That the limits, and I think for us at the Jewish Museum, we're like, well, we can't do this kind of work because we tell stories about history, and history is history. And then, within 2 months, it's like, no, you can be a little looser here. There's a way of doing this,
Oh, yeah.
I would love to open up the floor to questions. I know this is the awkward part of a Zoom program, everyone, but I know you guys are here for this, and you can help me out. So does anyone from the floor have any questions? You can throw them into chat. Cassie's going to kill me for saying this, but if you also want to even unmute yourself and ask a real question, although you can also throw it out, we love you, Anne, because that's also probably true. That we'd be delighted to have those.
So in the meantime, I'll tell you about, while people are formulating a question, sort of the thing that's percolating right now is, the artists are out of work probably for a year. I mean, it's bleak for the gig economy. And older adults are protecting themselves from this virus and being protected from it for probably a year. It's going to be very intense isolation. And I'm trying to figure out a way to, tap some of this CARES funding to cities and the state to hire artists to engage through telestories, through our system of phone work, and be able to pay them to do meaningful engagement, first in the city and then statewide. So that's sort of the current knot I'm trying to untie.
That is amazing and so needed. I have so appreciated this tonight. I don't know if there are any last questions. People, feel free to jump in. But this is always lovely. You can find Anne's book at retailers everywhere. I'm going to give a plug to Boswell because they are our nice local. But you can also find them in other venues online. But Boswell will deliver them to you.
I think Boswell still might have some signed copies too, because they dropped about 60 of them off at my house that I signed. So if that's of interest, yeah.
And I am excited to read this book. I am so appreciate just the energy and passion to which you bring this project that always inspires all of us who work in this sphere.
Yep.
And thank you all for coming out on what I think is a beautiful night in Wisconsin. I don't know, I'm in Florida. I ran away.
I'm in Brookline, Massachusetts. It was a wonderful evening. I'm so glad I came.
Oh, I'm so glad you came too, Sandy. It is so nice to see your face again.
Thank you.
And if you guys, we have many programs going on. You can join our e-newsletter list. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of this, but also it'll have the resources that Anne listed in the email in our talks in terms of the creative response and time slips and all of those pieces. And if you want to make a donation to Jewish Museum Milwaukee, it's always appreciated. You can go to our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Thank you. I think our next program is in process. We're doing a series with the other JMM, Jewish Museum Maryland, about a couple of exhibits that we've developed. So that'll be coming up in June, and then we have some more book talks coming in July and August. So keep an eye out, and thank you guys so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I added one last thing to the chat, which is an article that you might find really interesting from the dementia component, or from the Jewish side, which is Dale, oh, it's got a Y in there, D-A-Y-L-E, Friedman's Seeking the Tselem, Making Sense of Dementia, is a really beautiful thing that's very similar to my approach, but from the Jewish perspective. I think